Hello, my name is Jill Farris. I'm the Director of Adolescent Sexual Health Training and Education at the University of Minnesota Healthy Youth Development Prevention Research Center. My organization is a member of the Sex Education Collaborative. The SEC is made up of 24 national, regional, and state-based organizations who share the common goal to advance school-based sex education programs across the United States. One of the SEC's core values is comprehensive, high-quality sex education that is grounded in equity and social justice. Our collaborative is committed to challenging and dismantling systems of oppression by promoting equity and inclusion within sex education. As outlined in the SEC's professional learning standards for sex education, it is important that educators have strategies to acknowledge and proactively work to mitigate the impact of bias on their students' health and multiple intersecting identities. Today's video will focus on understanding this concept of intersectionality. The term intersectionality, coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, emphasizes how our collective identities affect our experiences and behaviors in relation to inequality, injustice, exploitation, and oppression. Intersectionality implores us to stretch sexuality education beyond a white-centered, cisgender, and heteronormative perspective. The framework allows us to see that racism, classism, xenophobia, and other forms of oppression don't act independently of each other, and in fact, overlap and depend on one another. We're going to hear now from Justine Fonte, who spoke so brilliantly about intersectionality in sex ed during her keynote at this year's Amaze conference. Comprehensive means intersectional, moving sex education forward.
So I'm going to talk to you about how we need to move sex education forward in a way that doesn't stop at comprehensive. I know we still have states that are doing nothing at all. We have states that are doing abstinence only. We have states that are doing abstinence plus, and then we have states that are doing comprehensive sex education. I want states to be doing intersectional sex education. And I know it is possible, and I know the effects of that. I'm excited to share with you what that means, what the impacts are, and that it is possible. So comprehensive needs to start meaning intersectional. I want Merriam-Webster dictionary to replace comprehensive sex ed with intersectional sex ed, because it's not enough just to teach them the bird and the bee, and then add on to that some vocabulary so that they know all of the different language that's out there if they don't have equal access to it. So the updated National Sex Ed Standards from last year, the first set came out in 2012, and now we have 2020s, stresses that sex education must be taught within the larger context of intersectionality. That is the fact that young people cross a variety of sexual orientation, gender identity, racial, ethnic, cultural, and other groups. To realize the full potential of comprehensive sex education, considerations of race, class, culture, ability, socioeconomic status, and other important characteristics need to be more deliberately woven into curricula, teaching, and evaluation. When we're teaching this, we have to remember that health's a human right, but we're not all experiencing it equally. So when we talk about our identities, we have to bring it into the classroom. This is a hot take. I get it. But this wheel of power and privilege helps us to understand it. And when you fill in those spaces, there's a lot of people who are going to hate it. They don't want to believe that they have privilege because they've suffered before. We want people to be called into a space where they can recognize where they have privilege and where they also may be marginalized so that we can connect as a human race and uplift each other so that the systemic barriers are no longer a barrier. Why do we need to do that? Because when we understand systemic oppression, then we are already taking the first step to dismantling it.
Let's get into some quick tips for how to operationalize intersectionality in your work. Number one, show examples of different body sizes, abilities, ethnicities, gender presentations, and more in your program materials. Take a look at the visuals in your classroom and programs, textbooks, puberty lessons, handouts, and make them inclusive of all the ways that our students show up in our program. Number 2, address and work to undo the hypersexualization of BIPOC women and femmes. Educators can and should debunk those myths that are associated with BIPOC women and femmes, particularly any body shaming that might occur based on race or ethnicity. Educators should also address the fact that BIPOC women and femmes are at higher risk for violence and abuse based on hypersexualization. Number 3, challenge single issue approaches and instead consider how racism and oppression, coupled with classism and misogyny, affect marginalized youth. Rather than programs or content focused solely on, for example, LGBTQ+ youth, teen parents, or youth in juvenile detention facilities, educators should consider the intersections of these groups. And number 4, call out and reject any white, cisgender, heteronormative approaches to sexuality education that you encounter. Intersectionality requires all of us to confront these incomplete approaches and work toward a future where all our programs benefit young people. We hope you found this information useful and feel inspired to use it in your work. For more information about the Sex Education Collaborative, please visit sexeducationcollaborative.org. If you're interested in training focused on intersectionality and sex ed, please click on the Training Hub link at the top left-hand corner of the page.